Hey everybody, and welcome to our second forecaster chat here. Um, Super excited for what we're going to be talking about tonight. We've got U.S. Air Force Major Kevin Kelly of the Alaska Rescue Coordination Center on, and we're going to discuss kind of the inner workings of how RCC works. Really quick before we dive into it, just some housekeeping items. The event is going to be recorded. It is being recorded right now, and we will post the recording online sometime in the next few days once we're done with this, and we'll share that link through our socials and on our website. We're hoping this is going to be all-inclusive discussion, so if you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat, or you can use the raise hand function down at the bottom of your screen. We're not going to use the Q&A just because that can get kind of confusing. So yeah, stick with the chat or the raise hand. The plan is to have some time at the end of the discussion for a little Q&A, but if you have anything that you feel like should pop up sooner, by all means, throw it in there. That's all I have for housekeeping. So with that, I'd like to introduce our guest for tonight. Like I said, we have Major Kevin Kelly. He's the deputy director of the RCC. He's been involved with the RCC for 2 years, but he's spent 18 years in the military, all in the Alaska Air Guard. And I guess, Kevin, if you want to hop on and maybe give us a little bit more about your military background and your involvement with the RCC, maybe we can start from there.
Yeah, sure. So hey, I'm Ken Kelly with the RCC. So yeah, I've been in the Guard for 18 years. Started off as a load master on like airlift 130s, then went off to pilot training and flew Payfox for about 7 years. Then in 2017, went off to training to fly HC-130Js, the search and rescue C-130 in the Air Guard. I've been flying those since about 2017, 2018, and then 2020 moved over to the RCC. So I've only been at the RCC for about 2 years, but involved in rescue in Alaska for, I'd say, probably about 12 years, all total. Yeah,
That's some serious experience. You mentioned a couple of the crafts that you fly, and I heard you say the H-130, the HC-130J, and the Pavehawk. Can you maybe describe each one of those a little bit for the folks that aren't quite so versed in the
Sure. Yeah, so the HC-130J, it's the Air Force's, or really the DoD's only dedicated fixed wing rescue asset. And it's basically just a modified version of a regular C-130. The biggest kind of differences you'll see are the refueling pods on the end to refuel the helicopters, as well as like up top, like it's kind of hard to see, but we also have the ability to take gas from like KC-130s as well. So we can take gas, give gas, and that's really kind of some of the big things that we bring to the rescue fight. Force multiplier, and then on the H-60, it's basically the Payfox, basically Army Black Hawk. The biggest thing that it's got is also kind of like, refueling wise as well, as it's got the refueling probe sticks out the right side of the helicopter. So that's kind of a big telltale sign of the difference. And that's kind of one of the main differences between Payhawk and just a regular Black Hawk, just kind of in a nutshell.
Cool. Yeah, those are impressive machines. I imagine that refueling capability really increases your range too, where you can respond. Is that right?
Yeah, it really does, and it's an awesome capability. Like in the state, obviously, large state in the U.S., and so kind of like say the tyranny of distance, if you will. The ability to kind of extend the range of the helicopters out, and then now with the the ability to extend the range of the C-130 as well with the new J models is pretty fantastic. Yeah.
Yep. So how about maybe we could start with what does the RCC do? So what's your mission?
Sure. So the Alaska Rescue Coordination Center is primarily responsible for aeronautical search and rescue in the inland portion of the state of Alaska. And that's really its primary role. Now, people know us a lot from coordinating backcountry rescues and whatnot, and that kind of falls into what I would say is like a secondary kind of mission set for us. Is really we're what I call like a conduit for state agencies to tap into Department of Defense resources. So, for instance, like Alaska State Troopers. So we do a lot of like what we call like an AST assist. So like if we were, for instance, going to rescue somebody in the backcountry, that would, for instance, be an AST assist, because the Alaska State Troopers is the primary coordinator for land-based search and rescue. And so us being that conduit for like AST to request assistance for like, the 210th, 211th, and 212th Alaska Air National Guard assets, as well as Army National Guard assets throughout the state of Alaska, Anchorage, Bethel, Nome, Juneau, et cetera. And active duty Army, they help us out quite a bit up in Fort Wainwright, up in Fairbanks. And also like probably one of our biggest assets as well as the Civil Air Patrol. So, more so Civil Air Patrol helps out quite a bit with, kind of they're known for, flying searches with a small aircraft as well, and like DFing, like ELTs. But a big capability that they are able to provide is cell phone forensics as well. So if, you're missing in the backcountry or whatnot, Civil Air Patrol, believe it or not, will actually provide a pretty great cell phone forensics capability to find, lost people throughout Alaska. But just kind of in a nutshell, primary responsibility for the AK RCC is aeronautical search and rescue. And then that, secondary is, tying state agencies with DoD assets in Alaska.
Yep. I guess that was kind of another question I had for you is what kind of assets do you guys have? So what tools are available that you're ready? Because I think that's kind of an impressive list.
Yeah, so I'll say before we kind of get into, and I kind of like talk a little bit about them, is a little bit of a misconception is we don't necessarily own any assets at the AK RCC. So what we like to say is we're an ask, not task. So we effectively broker rescue missions, if you will. Now the entities that that we're able to tap into and request help us out, Alaska Air National Guard that we talked about, the Army National Guard, as well as active duty Army and active duty Air Force to some extent, and then the Civil Air Patrol would probably be the biggest players that we're able to tap into and to provide support for search and rescue in Alaska.
So how does that whole chain of communication work? How do you get notified when there's an accident, and then how do you decide who you need to get a hold of, whether it's Army National Guard or the Air National Guard, or how does that work?
Sure. So it can kind of vary on the type of mission, if you will. So kind of going back into our primary mission set, so aeronautical search and rescue. So we'll get notified a few ways for AeroSAR, either being a report of an overdue aircraft, report of an aircraft, a downed aircraft, another aircraft seeing it go down and reporting it in, or getting a ELT. So kind of getting into like probably later on the conversations like PLBs, personal locator beacons, ELTs are the aviation version of that. And so we get the ELT alert directly into the RCC. And so we're able to essentially plot those out. And then with the 406 ELTs, there's a registration requirement for it. And then so we'll start making phone calls, finding out if it's, truly, find out the nature of the distress, if not. And then if it is like a distress situation, then we'll start in the process of tapping into assets that we could potentially request to go and support that mission. For like a backcountry rescue, like a skier or something similar, that's going to be a little bit different. So the primary flow information for that, if let's say like you called in a cell phone or a loved one called you in overdue, typically, they're going to call either like 911 or something similar, report that to the local authorities. They'll typically push that to Alaska State Troopers. Lieutenant Paul Fussey's probably listening in on this. He's the Alaska State Troopers SAR coordinator. So then he'll start basically working that mission. If he requires any type of assistance, like DoD assistance to support that SAR case, then he'll call us up. And then once he gives us the call, then we'll start, effectively like brokering, like I say, see if there's any available assets that would be willing to go and support that SAR case. And then something similar, which maybe we'll get into a little bit later in the conversation, is like in-reaches, like we were talking about, as well as like PLBs. So in-reaches are going to be a little bit different. And when I say in-reach, I mean like all the kind of commercial satellite messaging devices. So like your in-reaches, your Zolios, your Spots, your I think ACR has like the Bivy stick or something like that. Most of those are going to go to what's called like the IE RCC, which is in Houston, and it's a commercial run operation. And then so if you hit SOS on your inReach or any other similar device, for instance, that SOS message is going to go to that IE RCC. And then from there, they're going to plot out your coordinates. So for instance, if it's like in Hatcher Pass, they're going to say, okay, well, that's, state land. We're going to, notify Alaska State Troopers. And then they'll send essentially that SOS data to AST for them to start essentially running the mission, if you will. If you're in like national park land, they'll send that to the National Park Service as well. And then for instance, or continuing on with that, if like AST gets that inReach, SOS, they start working the mission and they deem that they would, potentially require some type of assist from us, then they would, go through and then request that assistance. And then if your eyes haven't rolled in the back of your head yet, like PLB. So for your PLB users out there, if you have a PLB and you kick that off, that alert, similar to an airplane ELT, flows through the RCC. Now with PLBs though, like I said, since we're not the primary agency that handles land SAR, and a PLB is land-based like search and rescue device, by and large, we're going to take that information, we're going to pass that to Alaska State Troopers, and then kind of back in again, if AST deems that they would require some type of assistance, they'll give us a call back and say like, hey, can you help us out with this SAR case?
So I'd say, like any other complex situation, the short answer is it depends. The chain of communication, but it's obvious there's a lot of steps involved. And I think that may be something that some people are aware of, but like, unless you get this inside view, I think that's something that gets missed, is that there's a lot going on between like either when you make the 911 call or when you hit that SOS button, and then you guys get the call. And even once you guys get the call, then there's a whole other chain of communication that needs to happen before there's actually someone in motion to go do the rescue.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just saw a chat pop up that I think this kind of fits in here, or a question pop up in the chat saying which of these groups are the PJs tied with. So how does that rescue group tie into the whole picture here?
Yeah, so the PJs are part of the 212th Rescue Squadron, and they're a part of the Alaska Air National Guard. And so they would be essentially one of those DoD, resources that, would be requested if like a state agency like AST, for instance, requested some type of assistance. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's they're part of the Alaska National Guard.
And that's so at RCC, the way you would play into that would be the state troopers get in touch with you, and then you have to make the call of whether you get the PJs involved with it. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so we'll, obviously proximity kind of like of, resources kind of plays a big factor in like who we're probably going to ask first, to support a mission. Like for instance, this past weekend, there was some stranded snow machiners. They're out caribou hunting up the Steese Highway, back-to-back missions. I think one was on Saturday and then another was on Sunday, like almost exact same kind of scenario. And the Charlie Company is the active duty Army medevac unit up in Wainwright. And so obviously, I mean, they're right there. And so obviously, they're going to be the most capable kind of asset to go and, support that, that mission, if you will. But, as we start getting into like, more technical type scenarios and whatnot, that's when we'll kind of weigh in like, okay, maybe this, might be more of a, a mission for, the Alaska Air Guard with the PJs and whatnot, like high angle terrain, et cetera, extraction equipment.
Yep. There's, I guess there's kind of two things that I want to get to that you talked, because you brought up a lot of really interesting points. One of them, maybe we can just dive into the tech a little bit. So you mentioned the PLBs, the 460 ELTs, and then there's the other third party, the InReach and whatnot, and then sat phones.
Yeah.
Maybe let's just go through the list. So first of all, in case there's people listening that don't know, what's a 460 PLB?
So not to get like super like nerding out and in the weeds. So like a 406 like ELT, or I would just say a 406 like SARSAT beacon. There's kind of like three devices that would fall in that family of like 406 beacons. So like if you're a pilot, you're familiar with an ELT. If you're a boater, you're familiar with an EPIRB. And if you're somebody that likes to travel in the backcountry, you might be familiar with the PLB. They're all effectively like the same thing. And what they do is they just broadcast a distress beacon on the 406 megahertz. That's why you hear like a 406, ELT or PLB. And those get picked up by a satellite, and it's all run like in a government architecture. And so those messages all will come into the RCC. Pros and cons of those, like the pro of a PLB is that it's a one-time purchase. So you buy it, I'd say, you can price them out. You can get them at REI or, other like a local outdoor store. I think they're about like $300. So one-time purchase. There's no subscription fee or anything. So, if you're kind of on a budget, I would say, those are probably a fairly decent option. The biggest downfall, I would say, with PLBs is there's a lot of ambiguity. So if obviously your risk level, risk acceptance level is going to vary from person to person. And so, somebody might pop off a PLB because they got spooked by a bear or they sprained an ankle, or somebody might pop off a PLB because, they, and this happened this past summer, people have been shot like out hunting. So there's obviously, there's a pretty, large, variance between those two types of scenarios. And with the PLB, you can't convey the severity or like the nature of like the type of emergency you're having. So we kind of move on to, some other types of devices, the commercial satellite messaging devices like your InReachers, your Zolios, et cetera. Those are, probably cost pretty similar, for that one-time purchase, but there's subscription fees with them, and they vary from, don't quote me, like, $10 or $15 a month, and they go up. Those operate off the Iridium satellites. So it's all like a commercial architecture, and it all goes to a commercial entity down in Houston, that AK RCC we're talking about. The biggest pro with those is that you now have an ability to convey, the actual nature of your distress to somebody, and you can build a picture to help, facilitate your rescue, if you will. And that is huge. And I'm happy to say, like, a lot of people are carrying either like InReaches or sat phones. And the more information you can provide to like SAR services, the greater you increase your chances of, kind of a successful outcome, if you will. Probably the biggest downfall of those is it does require, that monthly investment. But if you're an avid outdoorsman, I think it's definitely, worth the cost of admission. I have an InReach, I fly my own plane, my own personal plane, and I have an InReach. I pay for it monthly. And I would say by and large, most of the people I know that go out into the backcountry, seem to be utilizing some type of like, commercial satellite messenger. And then sat phones are pretty self-explanatory. Obviously, yeah, it's a phone you can talk off in the wilderness, off the grid. Biggest downfall of those are obviously a lot more expensive. But, there's, places in town, like if you're going for an extended trip, you can go and rent them out from, I think you can even rent out like InReaches and whatnot from the rental companies in town. So.
Yep. So for our field days, we're required, just because of our safety protocols, we have to bring some sort of satellite communications, and kind of our standard is the sat phone.
Mm-hmm.
And then we've also started carrying the InReach too. And I guess like I've got a couple questions for you there. First of all, like what are some things that we should be thinking about when we get this InReach? Because you get it right out of the box and you have the SOS function, but I think my understanding is that if you spend a little bit of time with setting it up, you can really help yourself and if you end up
Yeah,
in an emergency situation.
yeah, absolutely. And I'll be kind of careful because like I don't want to I'm not an expert at inReaches, if you will. So I'll be somewhat careful on like setting them up. I will say the biggest things, like I said, spend some time with it, learn the ins and outs of how to use it. Make sure you're putting good emergency contact information in your emergency contact list in your like inReach type device. Make sure like those people actually kind of know your whereabouts and what you're doing. So like if you're going to go out like skiing for like a ski traverse or something, make sure those people in that contact list actually truly know like, oh yeah, he's going to go do the Eklutna traverse. That's where he's at, and here's his game plan and whatnot. Yeah, make sure you familiarize it. Make sure you're because a lot of them have like web portals and whatnot that your like friends and family can log into and kind of see where you're at. Some of them aren't the most user friendly. I know like trying to describe to my wife like how to like log in and see where I'm at, like on like the inReach website can be a little bit of a hassle. But I think the more you can kind of get people to know like just your general like kind of game plan of what you're doing, the better. And then with the PLBs, and I'll take the opportunity too to kind of talk about aviation and aircraft ELTs. Make sure you register them. That's the most important thing. You're required to register it. So with the PLB, if you just went to REI and bought a PLB and thought like, hey man, I'm good to go, I just got to walk out the door and pop this thing off, like I'm ready to rock. You're not. You had to log into a NOAA website and you have to put your registration information in there, and also kind of going back into like kind of make sure you're putting good solid emergency contact information in there as well that know what you're doing. Because if you go out and you pop off that PLB and you have like emergency contacts that are long gone, don't really keep in contact with anymore, don't know your general whereabouts, it makes it much more difficult, specifically in the PLB scenario, to actually figure out like, hey, is this guy really in distress? Did he just throw it in the back of his backpack and it went off? Is it in a dump somewhere? And that happens. I'd say that probably the biggest thing is, yeah, make sure you put good information in the registration, and then make sure the people that you do put in there know what you're doing and like have a good like either like game plan for you.
Yep. For us, we have like a written plan, but I think the biggest part of it is having a like a check-in time. And I think that's pretty easy to communicate with a text with someone that knows where you're going and be like, hey, if I don't check in by 6, then I'm gonna be late. And if you don't hear from me by 7 or 8, then something's wrong.
Yeah, and I try to temper that a little bit, and this is just, me talking. So like if I go out like hunting or something, like on like a sheep hunt or something, I usually tell like my wife, like, hey, look, I'll text you in the evenings or something. And I usually turn it on, in the mornings, check, see if I get any text from her, say hi or something. And maybe around like lunch, I'll say hi. And then, for sure, like definitely in the evening I will. But also is like there's some issues with the inReaches as well. Whereas sometimes, with the cell carriers, those messages won't go through. They're pretty good about sending emails out and saying like, hey, we're having issues with this cell carrier. Our inReach messages aren't going through. So check-ins are great. Make sure you're checking in. But also, make sure you tell those people you're checking in with, hey, there's a possibility that like my inReach, you may not get the message, and it, you do have that SOS option that should go to like the AK RCC. Yeah.
Yep. I guess another question I had with all these different devices is, so say you get a call and you have a signal coming from a PLB, where you have virtually no information about what's going on. How do you decide what assets you need to respond to something like that?
So with like a PLB, that's where it's kind of like it goes back to like we're gonna pass that information to Alaska State Troopers because they're the primary agency for LandSAR. And then if they investigate it or deem that they require some type of assistance, there's a little bit like kind of get into making sausage of like how we're gonna like find the best resource. I would say proximity of resources plays the biggest part. And then we start looking into like, complexity of the mission, like how technical the terrain is, for instance. That might be a driving factor as well. So like, I know it's like not quite what we're talking about for like, aircraft instances like ELTs and whatnot. Sometimes if we can't quite, find out like the nature of distress, that's where like the Civil Air Patrol really comes in handy. And Civil Air Patrol has, gone and, done some like land SAR searches for us as well. Usually I'd say proximity plays the biggest factor, and then kind of complexity of the mission from there. Yeah.
So maybe it's too case specific, but if you got a signal like that, do you usually have to get eyes on it either by a flyby with Civil Air Patrol or with AST, or before you can decide what you send at it, or how does that work? Or does it just vary?
Yeah, it's going to vary a little bit. And that's where, our controllers are pretty good about putting their detective hat on. Kind of going back to like registration information plays a big part. If you can, find out like, hey, okay, it's a POB, and all right, we'll call the emergency contacts on there. And it's like, yeah, he was going to go ski the Revelations or something like that, is like, okay, well, now we're kind of getting into like more building the picture of like what's going on back there, or, versus like, yeah, I think he was going to go and like hike Crow Pass or, something, okay, maybe it's a little bit less, technical or something like that. So I would say it really depends on that one.
Yep. And it sounds like you can really speed things up, like coming back to having your devices set up where you have good contact info.
Yeah,
get that
absolutely. And that is kind of like the biggest pro too with like your inReach type devices is you can communicate that, very quickly about like the type of situation you're in. And that is what I like about the inReaches and, the commercial satellite mission devices is that ambiguity for the most part is gone. Now, what I will say with the inReaches as well, and some good kind of best practices for people out there with them, is hitting the SOS is great. We kind of talked about how it kind of flows through the system and whatnot, but understand like that you've just begun the process when you hit that SOS. Now, it's really important for you to continue monitoring your inReach from then on out. I would say check it every, 5 or 10 minutes, because once you hit that SOS, people are going to probably start asking you a lot of questions about like, hey, what's going on? And we had a recent mission out in Hatcher Pass, and they hit the SOS. It kind of flowed through AK RCC, AST, and then through us. And then we started texting them, and it was 45 minutes would go by before they would respond. So help yourself out and help us out. Like make sure you're checking those messages. Sometimes it'd be a little finicky. Make sure you're going in there, refreshing it, and be as communicative and as chatty as possible when you're texting, rescue folks on your inReaches and such.
Yep. I guess this is kind of tied to another question I had, where like, if you think about the kind of the low-hanging fruit where people are riding machines or where they're skiing, like Turnagain Pass, the Front Range, Hatcher Pass, they're all areas where you can get back with pretty limited effort, but if you get hurt, all of a sudden you're kind of it could be a serious situation. So I guess my first question along those lines is, what's a typical response time? Like say someone fall, not even for like a life-threatening thing, but say like I were to fall and twist my knee or something and I couldn't get myself out and I'm up on Turnagain Pass, but a couple miles off the road. What do you think a typical response time would be, if there is such a thing?
I'll be careful to actually put a hard number to that, but I'll tell you as quick and as long as it can take. So,
yeah,
for instance, like one time we had an ELT going off just north of Talkeetna for a distressed airplane. And the PAFOC was coming back from Eielson and was literally 10 minutes away. And we called them on the radio. They're like, oh, he's fine. He just flipped his plane over. He's good. His buddy's going to come pick him up. So it can be as quick as that to, as we were talking earlier about some of the folks that are, either doing like, some of the bigger ski traverses like Harding Icefield and then Kinnick, for instance. there's people that have been up there for 7 days, in snow caves and whatnot, waiting for rescue forces to come. So kind of like, we're talking about earlier, it's like general preparedness. It could be quick or it could be a really long time. So, for the folks listening in, I would definitely, factor that in when you're looking at your risk mitigation. Um, you know, Definitely when you're, looking at, your trip planning, like, and you're looking at what you want to throw in your kit, like, well, maybe I will throw like this extra, or actually throw this sleeping bag in there this time, because I might have to actually, spend the night out in the wilderness, or longer.
Yeah. What other, talking about kit stuff, what other kinds of rescue items do you think, like for if say you're going out for like a day of skiing or riding the snow machine, what do you think like a standard kit should have?
Yeah. I would say most important thing, like, or one of the most important things that we're talking about, like kind of beating the dead horse, is having some means of communication. Like, that would be definitely very high on my list, especially kind of for the weight conscious people. Like, it's pretty lightweight. And it's probably gonna be one of the biggest factors. And if you do get into kind of a bad scenario of getting you out of there. And then from there, I think it's probably going to be situation depending on what you're doing. Kind of like we're talking earlier, like, for instance, we had the folks going out. We had a mission recently for some hikers who are going out to a hut out in Hatcher Pass. They're planning on making the hut in basically one period of daylight. They got to some pretty steep terrain, and then thought it was, a high probability that, it could, turn into an avalanche. So they're, relatively skilled. They dug a snow cave and whatnot, but they were planning on making to the hut, and they just did not have any type of ability, like overnight equipment, to stay outside of the hut. So really, and I think they had just one sleeping bag between the two of them, and I don't think they had any type of like bivy or a tent. So I would think, as you're looking at like, okay, hey, what specifically am I getting out to, to go and accomplish on this trip? Start doing some contingency planning, some what ifs. What if you do wind up like having to stay out overnight because you twisted an ankle, broke a leg? Same thing like if you're out snow machining. What if your sled breaks down, or you get in a lot deeper snow than you thought was out there and you have to overnight? I would start looking at like, what are some of the contingency scenarios, and then as you start developing those in your mind, then start kind of building like, okay, well, what kind of gear do I actually want to bring with me?
Yep. Yeah, I think like when people are building a first aid kit, it's easy to get hung up on like bleed kits and splints and stuff like that. But the easiest stuff, like you're saying, is the environmental part,
Mhm.
like
Yeah,
extra layers and being able to
yeah.
spend more time out there than you're planning on. It's a big
Yeah,
deal.
and for me, like, and I'm not, I'm not like a medical professional. Like, I'm not have any type of like EMT or trained up to like PJ standards, and I'm not like a, survival, like a SEER guy who's trying to teach, survival. But like for me, like when I go out flying and whatnot, usually, I mean, I keep it pretty simple. Honestly, it's usually kind of the stuff I'd normally just take hunting with me or something. Just a tent, sleeping bag. Maybe food for a couple days. Something to make water with, etc. I try to keep it fairly common sense, and don't overthink it. I think the medical stuff I'd probably steer clear of, because I'm not the best to talk to about it. But uh, yeah, I would just say use some common sense, and really just what if, some of the scenarios you might get into, while you're out in the backcountry.
Totally.
Yeah.
I guess maybe one more question for you about the communication devices, and then we can maybe leave that alone or not if other people have questions about it. But so there's all these different options, and obviously they each have their advantages. Do you have a preference? Like if you could just have one, do you have one that you would carry with you?
Some of the messaging devices we were talking about.
Yeah, messaging devices, or would you rather have a sat phone, or would you keep it simple, just a PLB, or if because
Yeah, so good question. And I'll, kind of the prior commander of the 211th Rescue Squadron, he's now the 176 Officer Commander. He's big into boating. And, when he goes out, he likes to have a sat phone. And the reason why he says he likes a sat phone over an inReach is because when the motor breaks, it's a lot easier to call up the guy in the shop and talk about, like, over the phone, like, hey, what do you think's wrong with my engine? What do you think's wrong with my boat? How can I fix it? So for him, he really likes a sat phone, which, great, more power to him. For me, like when I go out, I like the inReach or like, similar type device. More just because of it's light, the battery lasts a very long time. And I typically find, for what I'm doing, it's just easier to send texts and whatnot. It really just works very well for me. So for me, I really like the inReach. PLBs, they're great. Like I said, we kind of discussed some of the pros and cons of them. Along that kind of same line, like I have an ELT in my airplane, like I'm required to, encourage people, to upgrade to the 406. If there's any pilots listening, definitely put a 406 in your airplane and make sure it's registered. But just for me personally, I just like the inReach type devices, and they work well for me. And from working missions at the RCC, I find they're easy to work with. And they really help, expedite missions. And that same vein, sat phones work great too. So there's nothing wrong with sat phones. They work fantastic too. They're easy to pull coordinates off of. We can call Iridium and actually get the coordinates the last time you turn the sat phone on. So you can send text messages with them, but honestly, they work great. Yeah.
Yep. Cool. Well, I guess just going down my list, I got kind of a quick one. Is there an area or like a zone where you find that you end up doing a lot of rescues? Like where's your like the most concentrated missions where you end up coordinating rescues?
Yeah, definitely South Central Alaska. And it's honestly just because, population center. So if you look at kind of like a heat map, like, kind of like where all the, pinpoints are from like, when we plot out all our missions and whatnot, it's definitely heavily centered in, the South Central area. So like inside the Alaska range is predominantly where we do most of AST assist as well as like AeroSAR as well. Kind of get into medevacs, which we hadn't really talked about, is another kind of we help support at the RCC as well. And those are usually out in like Western Alaska during the winter time. And that has to do with like weather and like, instrument approach capabilities out for the runways out there. But I'd say by and large, and it's just because where the population's at, South Central.
Yep, totally. I meant to ask you this at the beginning, but how many missions do you guys run in a year?
Typically a little over 100.
Yep.
Yeah.
I guess another question I had for you is, so we've been talking a lot about communication and being prepared, but say I'm in an accident or my partner is, or someone in my group, and I need to make a call or send out maybe I've got service and I'm able to send a text to someone and I don't have to hit the SOS. What are like the key pieces of info that I need to share to like speed up that process as much as possible? What's the info that you're looking for when you're trying to coordinate a response?
Yeah. So, I mean, the biggest thing that I was like, location is going to be key, right? And so the best way that you can actually like nug down your true location, the better off, the more you're kind of going to reduce the timeline of the rescue chain. A lot of people will like call in and say like, hey, I can see the lights of, Seward and I'm up hiking on a mountain. And you're like, oh, okay, well, can you tell us a little bit, more fidelity of where you are? I don't know. I'm just on a mountain. I can see the lights of Seward. So that's a little frustrating because now you're kind of, you're doing some searching as well as doing some rescuing at that point in time. So the more you can minimize the search aspect of it, the better. So location is super important. And then from there, kind of going into like, hey, actual, like, nature of your situation and whatnot, that's definitely equally important to the, your location. And then, the type of terrain you're in, et cetera. Just kind of, who, what, when, where, how type stuff. And, just build as best of a picture as possible. and have the greatest like situational awareness of like where you are and what you're doing is key.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a big part of that is also like how far off the road you are in the wintertime, right? Because it seems like
Yeah.
there's kind of a limited number of people that can respond to something if you're on snow and even like 2 miles off the road.
Yeah.
Um, this just pops in my head when you're thinking about doing the running the search part. I remember, or like I've heard people talking about like maybe it's either the Pavehawks that you guys run, or I don't know if it's the state troopers fleet, but that they have these infrared cameras where they can find you no matter what. But I've kind of heard mixed stories about that, where like maybe they're not quite as much of a magic wand as people think. And I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think people do think they're kind of like this silver bullet, and it's like playing Call of Duty, type, it just works amazing. There's definitely a lot of limitations that go along with, utilizing, FLIR type systems to search for like missing persons. Probably one of the biggest things too is you're looking through a soda straw, for the most part. And so like, it's one thing if you're trying to find keys, in your house and you're going through your entire house, you're like, oh, shoot, where did I, leave those keys at? Well, now like try doing that as you're looking through a soda straw, and trying to find like, oh, okay, well, shoot, where's those keys at? And just, the different, imaging systems are, there's different, kind of fidelity, capabilities of the system. So they're not like created equal. Weather plays a huge part in it, versus like actually, if you have any type of like, moisture in the air, and then like your ceiling, it's going to limit your ability. So there's all kinds of stuff kind of going into is why it's not as it's great, when it works out, but it's not quite the silver bullet for finding, people, lost like hikers. You're not just gonna like, kind of like start scanning it and just find like some like hot spot in the woods and like, oh, hey, there's the person out right there. And canopy, like, yeah, like if you're trying to look through like a canopy or something that can obscure, like, looking, finding that IR signature. So yeah, it works great when it works, but it's not quite the cure all for finding lost folks.
Yep. This kind of ties into another question I had, just thinking about weather and different conditions. Obviously for us at the Avalanche Center, we're focused on winter travel and winter accidents. So I guess I'm kind of curious is like, what are the additional challenges you guys face trying to coordinate a rescue that's on snow during the winter versus a summer rescue, or like someone that's out hiking and hunting or something like that?
Yeah, so winter brings its, the biggest thing is the obvious. It's dark out, right? And so typically, the crew's gonna be flying on NVGs at that point in time, which kind of adds to the difficulty of the mission. Factor in that typical kind of like winter, weather. So now you're flying in like blowing snow with, at night on NVGs. But then at the same time too, like, on NVGs, it's really easy to find somebody who's like flashing a headlamp. You can see them from miles out versus like in the summertime, you don't get that benefit of, finding those, light sources on NVG. So there are those pluses and minuses. I would say by and large, though, it definitely increases the difficulty and complexity of the mission, though, like having to fly those SARs at night.
Yep. I hadn't thought about that with being able to, the advantage you have of it being dark and being able to flash a headlight. That's one thing I hadn't thought about. Another item to keep in the kit if you don't already.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah, I would definitely throw a headlamp in your kit, even if you're going out for the day or something. Like, yeah, definitely put a headlamp in there. That's
I'd
clutch.
imagine, hopefully most folks do already.
Yeah, I would hope so. Yeah, you never know. You never know.
Yeah, you never know.
Yeah.
Well, I want to make sure we have enough time. I've noticed that there's a lot of questions coming in, and Wendy will probably need your help sorting through them. But I guess before we dive right into the Q&A, you've kind of touched on some of the missions that you've coordinated recently. I was wondering if you maybe want to share one or two just kind of stories about missions that you've run lately, or if you have any photos or anything like that.
Yeah. Let's see if I was talking about the Harding ice field, and this one just kind of like just gee whiz to kind of like for the guys doing like out backcountry skiing, doing some ski traverse and whatnot. So see if I can actually do the screen share. But this was I can't I don't think we talked about it during the actual chat, but so back in 2016, there was two skiers that were doing a ski traverse of the Harding ice field. Weather blew in and pinned them down. They basically set up their tent, jumped in their tent to wait out the weather. I don't know like how great of a tent they had, but it collapsed under the snow loading. Then they went and decided to, smartly so, they were just going to go ahead and like dig into a snow cave because the tent just wasn't working anymore. So they dug into a snow cave. In the process of moving their gear in the snow cave, it got soaking wet. And they spent probably a couple of days in like wet sleeping bags and whatnot. I'll give them props. They were relatively well prepared. They did have an inReach on them, and they were very, very good at using it, and as well as keeping everybody up to date, which probably was a little frustrating to them as the days were going by, as they were sitting in the snow cave waiting to get dug out. But I was not at the RC at that time. I was back when I was flying helicopters, but landed next to snow cave, and the PJs dug them out. And so as I was kind of going through some decent like photos or videos, I found it. Let's see if I can actually do the share here real quick. And I lost where is the option on here? I just had it earlier.
I've got one.
Yep, okay. I got it. Okay, here we go. All right, so it should be sharing here. And so, yeah, so this is landed. This is on the Harding ice field. Can you see it?
Yep, it's showing.
Let's hit play here real quick. So yeah, pretty challenging weather initially trying to get these folks out, and really all we could see was just their ski poles poking up out of the their snow cave and whatnot. Eventually kind of the weather rolled out, and we were able to land next to them and get them out. And that was kind of one of the cooler videos I had. I don't have anything too great of a recent missions that I was able to pull kind of on the short notice, but I don't know. That people usually like seeing that one. And oh, hang on.
Yeah, that's great. Love seeing one with a happy ending like that.
Yeah. And so that one, if we want to talk some more about, because we didn't touch on enough the inReaches and stuff, that one was a very classic case, or a good case of people, using it, and also kind of talking about rescue timeline, right? The weather of Alaska has a vote on whether or not you're going to get picked up, and so like in their case, they were stuck for quite a few days in that snow cave. So that response timeline can be fairly extended. Some of the other recent missions we had kind of talked about a little bit was the Hatcher Pass hikers going up to the hut. Kind of talk a little bit about like just general preparedness with that one, and just kind of what if contingency planning. And then same thing kind of ties into the hunters up on the Steese Highway that got stuck on their snow machines. For the most part, by and large, they were all like, they had inReaches, or they had a PLB. The first hunters on the Steese, they had a PLB that they kicked off, but maybe they just weren't planning to stay overnight. If they did actually, have the gear to keep them there overnight, I would say by and large, they probably would have been able to get themselves out the following day. So that it helps us out. And when, obviously you don't call us, or, when, the troopers don't call us, so affect your own rescue by not getting in trouble.
Yep. We, along the lines of rescue stories, we had a friend of the Avalanche Center reach out to us. He wasn't able to tune in tonight, but he broke his leg up on Turnagain Pass last year, and the PJs came and ended up pulling him out of there. And he wanted us to pass on that he was very thankful of your guys' rescue effort. So
Yeah, right on.
I'd pass that on to you. But
yeah, right on.
I think he'll be watching the recording. He said he couldn't tune in tonight.
Yeah, very cool. I always like to hear that.
Yep. Well, I get one of the last question I had for you, which maybe we've already talked about enough, but maybe just like to drive it home, is what are the best things that backcountry users can do to prepare themselves for a possible rescue?
Yeah, start, really look at like some risk mitigation, take a look at before you go out on a trip. Start doing some contingency planning, like things that may go wrong, and then start preparing yourself for those specific situations. Being it, just simply preparing to spend an additional night out there or bringing some additional medical equipment. And then communication is key. Communication is, probably one of the most important things, not only a STAR scenario, but just in life in general. So the more you can set yourself up to communicate with loved ones or with, SAR responders to build a picture of kind of like what's going on, the better off you'll be.
Yep. Seems like funny how everything in life, it seems like communication is kind of important.
Yep.
Well, is there anything else that we didn't get to that you want to touch on before we dive into the questions here?
No, pretty good. Yeah.
All right. I see, Wendy, I might need some help filtering through these, but I'll start with one that jumped out at me. Seeing as that we are, after all, an avalanche center, here's an avalanche specific question. If a member in your group is buried in an avalanche, and obviously we're going to have to go through and do an avalanche rescue, which takes some time. Should another group member hit the PLB first before we start doing the avalanche rescue, because there's a high likelihood that that person that you're digging out of the snow is going to be injured or need some kind of medical attention?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I guess probably situationally dependent, because like, I know, like, I'm not an avalanche expert. I know, like, if it was probably a big slide or something like that, and I saw my friend, get, enveloped in snow, like, yeah, I'd probably be pretty quick to hit the on button on the PLB or hit SOS on like an inReach. I would say, maybe since you have like an inReach or like a sat phone, you probably avoid in the SOS just yet and start, maybe texting some loved ones that or your emergency contacts that the type of situation you're in. So good question, and I'd be hesitant to kind of give you a firm answer because I'm not really an avalanche expert, but yeah, if you feel that you are in a life, limb, or eyesight situation, yeah, go ahead and kick it off.
Yep, I agree, and I think it really does depend. And it probably comes down to resources you have on site too. Like if you have 4 or 5 people that are able to start doing a rescue and it looks like it's going to be a severe case, maybe you could set one person to start getting the emergency response initiated. But if it's just a one-on-one, you're probably best interest is to get the airway clear first if it's a full burial, and then proceed with the rest second. That's my instinct, at least.
True.
Let's see, I'm just looking through our questions here.
There was one, this is Wendy, sorry, Andrew. There was one really quick about walkie-talkies, and maybe this would be a good, they were wondering about the use of walkie-talkies. So maybe just some comments on their capabilities.
Yeah, not the sharpest on like walkie-talkies because they operate on like different bands and channels. I think they'd be good for communicating with people in your group. So I would say probably not a bad idea, if you're bringing them. It just kind of jogged my memory. I think there were some hikers up in the Brooks Range maybe last year where they got separated, and I think they kicked off an ELT or started talking on the inReach, but basically they didn't know where the other partners were in their hike. And they just got separated. So walkie-talkies probably would have helped prevent that before it ever started. And then going back to as well, like you can link up your satellite devices together to text each other as well. But walkie-talkies probably be good. Yeah, if you get separated, to be able to link up with your group and find out like, hey, is everybody okay? Yeah, we're good. All right, fine. Like let's link up, rally up at this point, and then press on with our trip.
Yep. And you think about like a day of, well, just any day riding snow machines, it's kind of inevitable. You're going to lose eyesight of one of your partners that could get into trouble, even just getting stuck, or like a day of storm skiing in the tin can trees even.
Yeah.
Seems like it's kind of a useful tool to have. I know at the Avalanche Center, we use them quite a bit. It seems like the motorized crowd, we use them a little bit more than the ski crowd, just by the nature of it's so much easier to put spaces and things happen so fast.
Yeah.
See, I think the other part is knowing how to use them and being efficient at communicating with them too, because they can add more confusion in some cases.
Yeah. I would say I think AST's is pretty savvy, and I don't want to speak for them or sell them out or anything, but they've got a pretty good radio suite to be able to potentially talk to folks in distress on like the different types of channels and bands. Military side, everything's typically mostly focused more towards like military centric, means of communication. So usually now you're just kind of looking at just standard VHF, frequencies. Probably not the best answer on my end for the walkie-talkie part, but probably good to, bring with you. Yeah.
Yep. I guess, and just so everyone else knows, like we're looking at questions here in the chat, but also if you want to just tune in and you find it easier to talk, you can raise your hand and we can let you ask a question too. Do you have any other good questions popping up, Wendy? I'm just searching through them right now too.
Yeah, there was one interesting one that might be good to clarify, and that was, I'm trying to scroll back to it, but it was wondering about if civilians have the ability to contact RCC, or just clarifying that route of communication with local authorities.
Yeah, so if you're any type of like backcountry, land-based kind of distress situation, I highly encourage you to call 911 and then work through the kind of the channels that way. Or if you're able to get in touch with somebody back, in cell service, have them start that process by just calling 911 and then kind of going back to make sure you're communicating and building a good picture of your situation. And then that will flow through the appropriate channels. I would say typically I would only encourage civilians contacting the RC directly for unless it's like aeronautical type SAR situation, like downed aircraft or whatnot, then absolutely you can contact the RC directly. But for land-based SAR, 911 is going to be your best option, your best friend.
We had a couple of questions related to helicopters and LZs, so I think they're kind of related. One of them was just, are there any suggestions for picking a good LZ that a heli can land at? Is snow depth or even stomping a landing, is that a thing? And then another one that's along those lines is, if there is, so if you're on a rescue, can you share concerns that folks on the ground, or something that people on the ground should keep in mind as there's a helicopter potentially landing or flying nearby, just safety concerns, thinking about rotor wash and whatever else?
Sure, I'd say probably just, if you're trying to pick out just a general LZ for, most helicopters, in the state, I'd say probably a basketball court size field is going to work, best for, most of the helos in the state. Snow depth, I wouldn't get overly concerned with snow depth or whatnot. Really shouldn't be a factor. Most of the helos are ski equipped. And then for, even the ones that aren't, they're usually able to kind of sit on the belly for the most part too. For general concerns, definitely for the bigger helos, the rotor wash can be pretty significant. So start policing up your kit. So if you've got like, tents, bags, whatever laying around, make sure you police all that stuff up, get it secured, because, it's going to be some pretty significant wind forces that are going to be coming landed relatively near you that might blow your gear around. Or, potentially have some type of like, blown object, kind of, hit you or something. So be mindful of your surroundings in that respect, if something might get kicked up by the rotor wash and hit you. And then, yeah, package up your camp. I've definitely seen some camps get kind of blown off, before in the past. So I'd say that's probably the big ones. Yeah.
Yep. This is kind of along similar lines, just thinking about like the nuts and bolts of flying, but what are some of the weather factors that play into a go or no go situation for the rescue flight? What are the differences in weather? Maybe you don't know this, I don't know, but are there different weather restrictions for different rescue organizations in the state?
Yep, there are, and it's going to vary between organizations. So like last day troopers aren't going to fly at night. And then I don't want to speak to the different like medevac helicopter operators, but they're going to have different restrictions as well as whether or not they're MG equipped, and they have their own stated minimums that I don't know off the top of my head. And then the military is going to have its own set of minimums that are going to be different between the Army and the Air Force as well. But it's going to be pretty typical stuff, like ceilings, visibility, winds.
Yep. I've got another question here about inReaches. Do you need to do anything in terms of setting up your inReach to link with local authorities in any way? Are they going to get the message when you hit that SOS?
Yeah, they'll get the message when you hit the SOS. So you hit that SOS and just kind of going through it again. It's going to go down to the AK RCC, which is like, again, like a commercial company down in Houston. And then from there, they're going to look at your location, your GPS location. And basically they have a list of folks of like, okay, like if you're in, like Hatcher Pass, turn again, like, okay, well, this is AST's land. Or if you're in like, McCarthy, like Chittestone or something, like, oh, okay, well, that's the NPS. We're going to contact the NPS.
Mm-hmm.
Andrew, there is one other here before we get too far away from the helicopter capabilities.
Oh, yeah.
Do you mind if I jump in? It was
Jump.
from a little bit earlier, but it's talking about not all, or it's talking about, you're talking about the landing zones, but there are cases where you don't have a good landing zone. And that's when, you have to have a hoist capability. And so this question is talking about that, or asking about that, and wondering what that looks like. What does it mean when you don't have a landing zone? And when you think you're in that kind of place, what's the best way for someone to communicate? It says, what's the best way for someone to communicate that requirement or that situation?
Sure. And so I go back to just general description of your terrain. I wouldn't try to worry about like, hey, what type of, helicopter should come out here to pick me up. I would just focus on making sure you can describe the terrain around you to the best of your ability. And then allowing the folks either in AST or the AK RCC to basically take that data and talk with our folks to kind of determine the best resource to send your way. Because like a lot of guys, hey, like you're not not pilots, not helicopter pilots, not rescue pilots or whatnot. So what may seem precarious to you or not precarious to you may be actually like a big deal. So if you can just basically go back to comms, describe your surroundings to the best of your ability, and then let kind of the folks kind of figure out what the best asset is for you.
Yeah, I know that's a big one and a tricky issue. I'm just scrolling through. See if we've missed any of these questions. I think we've gotten to most of them.
I think so too. There's lots of little ones on communication that I think have been answered.
I think I saw one pop up. So like 121.5. Yeah, pretty much all your aviation assets are going to be monitoring 121.5. All your aviation SAR assets, for the most part, will be listening on 121.5. And then I saw another thing about Air Force RCC in Tyndall. They're our analog down in the lower 48. So they're responsible for aeronautical search and rescue for the contiguous United States, and then we're responsible for aero SAR in the inland regions of Alaska.
Cool. I'm glad it's all three of us are monitoring it. There's a lot of questions coming in.
I'm seeing them like pop up real quick, and it caught my eye. Yes.
Yeah. Yep. Oh, we had just a quick question. Which hut was it in Hatcher Pass where you had to do the rescue earlier?
It was I don't want to dime anybody out.
Okay.
All
All right. No worries. Yep.
Yeah.
Well, I think unless we're missing someone speak up if we're missing your question, but I think we've gotten to everything. So I guess with that, we might wrap it up. Kevin, I really can't thank you enough for taking the time to do this. It's been super informative to me, and it seems like a lot of folks got a lot out of this, and it's definitely, we really appreciate what you're doing there at RCC.
Yeah, thanks. Really appreciate it. It was an honor to be on here and answer your questions and talk about what we do.
Yeah, excellent.
Hey, Kevin, I have to jump in because we do have
Sure.
some people writing some more in here, but
Okay.
Isaiah would like to know what Mr. Kelly does to recreate in the backcountry personally.
I used to do just like some resort skiing. I haven't really done it nearly as much in a while. I used to do a little bit of snow machining. I haven't really done it as much in a while. I like to take my my dogs hiking, like even in the wintertime, just kind of in like the front ranges and whatnot. Like, just I live out in Eagle River, so just kind of the trails out in Eagle River. I like to get out. So, and I really do a whole lot of backcountry skiing. A lot of my friends do it. I'm somewhat familiar with it, but I myself don't do it. I own a Cub, so I like to go and mainly in the summertime, I like to go rally around the state in the Cub. So even just going out hiking or whatnot, or just like hunting, definitely enjoy probably going like sheep hunting like every year for it's always I look forward to that. Yeah, kind of in a nutshell.
Awesome. And there's one more note I wanted to pitch in here before we close out and get it back to Andrew. But lots of folks are writing in about thanks for everything the RCC does. Thanks for everything the Air National Guard does, the Army Guard, and all the assets that you are able to reach out to, Civil Air Patrol and all those guys.
Yeah, appreciate it. And really like all those partner, agencies that we work with, we really appreciate the RCC. So I'm glad you gave them a shout out, like ASD, AMRG, AINT, MATSAR. I know I'm like, forgetting people, but there are so many SAR players in the state and they do an awesome job. And it really, makes my job easier and makes all our lives a little bit better in the state.
You know what? Sorry, Andrew.
No, go for it.
Just reminded me of a comment / question from the very beginning of tonight. And I'm just going to paraphrase it because it'll take too long to find, but they were wondering if the Air National Guard or other DoD resources are utilized in the lower 48, or if we're just lucky up here.
They do get utilized in the lower 48. like California Guard, for instance. Like you probably saw on the news, was it last year? Like the big fires in California. The Army National Guard definitely did a great job, like evacuating people and pulling people out of the fires. That's probably the one that comes off the top of my head right now. I know, but the Guard definitely gets after it in War 48 as well. And does a great job. But I will say Alaska, it is also a very unique environment for the SAR resources that the Guard and the military in general kind of provides up here. So yeah, definitely unique, definitely a cut above, but they definitely do quite a bit of work in Lower 48 as well.
Excellent. We just had one more question pop in, but this should be a quick one. Do you use the spot forecasting from the Weather Service when you're coordinating rescue missions?
No, typically we use just like government products. We have weather forecasters on Jabber that we'll talk to, as well as just like NOAA weather. So a lot of just the kind of the standard publicly available weather is typically what we use. Nothing terribly fancy.
Yep. Cool. Oh, there's one more that just came in. Is there a way to text directly with RCC using InReach, or does that communication flow through your friends or family members you have set up on your device?
Yeah, so kind of going back to again here, beating I don't say beat a dead horse, but repeat myself for the chain of events here. So you hit SOS goes to the IERCC, and then it'll kind of flow to like AST or whatnot. Once we get linked up with it, we'll contact the IERCC directly, and we'll get your specific InReach number from the IERCC, and we'll start texting you to kind of start establishing communications, if you will. Yeah.
Yep. Cool. Well, awesome. Thanks again, Kevin. I really appreciate you taking the time. This has been great.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for having me. Yeah, that's been great.
Yeah. I guess the only last thing I'll talk about before we sign out, I just want to give a quick shout out to the friends of the Chugach Avalanche Center. They provide about half of our annual budget, including our setting up these Zoom events and giving all kinds of behind the scenes support to our Avalanche Center. And they're supported entirely, well, partially through member donations. If you want to become a member, there's links to that on our website. So I'll just do a quick plug for them there.
Yeah.
But beyond that, I think we'll leave the chat open for a few more minutes and for you guys, for everyone. But yeah, I'm gonna sign out here.
All right. I saw datum on there. Somebody asked. It's Wigs 84 is the datum we use if anybody cares.
Oh yeah, wow. Getting into the weeds.
Yeah. Minutes, decimal minutes, degrees, minutes, decimal minutes is usually kind of the preferred format. But any type of like lat long, like minutes or degrees, minutes, seconds, or degrees, decimal degrees, we can convert it. So yeah.
Cool.
That's it.
Awesome. Thanks, Kevin.
Hey, thanks.
Yep.